Hello, everyone. I am so excited today to introduce you to Megan Smith and walk you through this fantastic book that her and Mark have written on Microsoft 365 Copilot adoption. You know, adoption is one of my favorite topics, and I love it when people have action-oriented text. So let's hop in and hear from the author herself. Meg, you want to join us now?
Hi, it's so nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. I'm so glad that you're here. I'm thrilled to talk about this book. There's so much great insight, and like I said, am a fan of an actionable plan. But let's start at the beginning. Tell us a little bit about you and Mark and why you decided to write this book.
Yeah, so Mark has been involved in the Microsoft world for more than 20 years, I think. We're both from New Zealand, and he started out in biz apps and was working in, I think, one of the earliest versions of CRM. So that's kind of his entry into Microsoft. And over the years, he's been involved in the MVP program. So coming to Redmond almost every year. Which is, I've heard a lot about these experiences and these trips. And I tagged along one year. But most of my career has been with Google, actually. I spent nearly a decade with Google in Australia and the UK and here in New Zealand. And in the last couple of years, though, I've spent more time working in our own business where we together are working with Microsoft in Redmond a bit, but also just kind of looking at the Microsoft community around the world and how we can help people who might be new to it or were coming into this kind of technology space from somewhere else. How can they navigate what we've found to be a really exciting sort of part of the world?
I'm so glad to hear that. As I say quite often, I'm a product of the community. It has given me so many opportunities and the opportunity to meet so many great people and make connections. So I'm thrilled that, Mark has brought you into the community space and you can welcome new people because, the community needs to be welcoming to all. How did you get interested in adoption of something like Copilot coming from Google?
Yeah, so I actually, my interest in AI really was quite personal. So I was on maternity leave. I had a 3-month-old when Mark called me over from our kitchen area, and we can see through to his office. And he said, "Hey, Meg, come and have a look at this." And he was actually bringing up ChatGPT. So it must have been November 2022, thereabouts. And he was showing me what it could do. And I must admit, I was sleep deprived, to be fair. I had a newborn, but I got this full body sweats of holy goodness, what is it going to be like when I go back to work in 6 months? I had worked in the advertising technology space, so I was really familiar with AI in the context of machine learning and how that sort of played out in advertising. And as I had left Google, we were starting to see things like, suggested finishing of your sentences and emails, which was hilarious because I thought I was pretty original, but actually turns out I'm pretty predictable in the way that I write. So it wasn't completely new to me, but in that moment, seeing sort of what was happening with generative AI, it really spurred me to realize I hadn't been learning enough. And I went on my own sort of personal journey to try and feel like I could get back a little bit of a sense of control and switch that initial fear of what would this mean for me? What would this mean for my job? Into curiosity of how might I understand this? How might I use it? And so that was sort of where I made it a conscious choice. And of course, my feeling at that moment didn't end up being true. 6 months later, ChatGPT or generative AI hadn't sort of magically made all the jobs disappear. But what I had learned was that it was changing in a way that I, couldn't really relate to any of the technology I'd learned or sold in my career. So my way to learn it had to be very different. And I love what you say about action-orientated learning or suggestions, because it was through practice, practicing prompting and practicing some of the different skills that are helpful when it comes to adopting this technology, that I built more confidence and more curiosity.
You're talking about a really personal journey of understanding and going from what I term AI anxiety to curiosity and engagement. Talk a little bit more about that when you think about that at an organizational level. I find it so essential that people make that transition, but it can be a very hard road.
It is a hard road. And I think the thing that enables it is really clear leadership direction and commitment. And we talk about this in the book. We have a whole chapter on commitment. And we found in looking at the patterns of adoption across the early adopters in the Copilot program that leadership commitment was a big consistent theme.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think maybe someone I know might have a quote in that section of the book, maybe, just maybe. But
we took it straight from you.
you might have. It's good. Well, I think it is important because also it's about having it on the line with your workforce, right? I feel like this workforce transformation that we're all leading and leaning into can feel like a lonely journey if you don't have leaders being visible in what they're going through.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the idea of an executive sponsor has been really common in technology adoption. But with AI and with Copilot, you need that coalition of executive sponsors. You need that really clear united front from the board through to the executive and through to the senior management to say, we think this is important and this is how it will help us deliver our strategy. And so you get that message as an individual. Along
those lines, there's a rise in this term, the AI evangelist, for those leaders who are doing that work, or even champions who are leaning in and helping other business users, even in their own division, understand the AI capabilities. How do you feel about that term?
I like AI evangelist. I think champions is something that we use in the book because it feels really accessible. It doesn't feel like it's someone else who's maybe super qualified, or sometimes the term AI expert feels a little uncomfortable to me because no one's really an expert. We're all learning. We're all learning together. And yeah, I think there's a difference that was picked up by our technical editor, Zoe Wilson, that a champion that might be helping a peer learn or get to their aha moment with Copilot needs different skills or different experience than a champion who is mentoring a senior leader to find their aha moment, which I thought was really insightful.
Absolutely. And I love that you call that out, the difference between being more role specific in the engagement and adoption that we do. But before we dive into the roles, it reminds me of something. You co-authored this with your husband, Mark. How was that working together on a book like this? And how did you divide the labor of love that doing any kind of book like this really is?
We started with what was quite a logical and linear approach, which we thought. When we pitched the book to Microsoft Press, we included the structure that remains, the 3 parts, and the 12 C's framework to understand it. So what we did was we printed out paper, each one on a paper, and we got our Post-it notes and said, well, you do half and I'll do half. And then we did nothing. We kind of hit a bit of a writing block because that wasn't the way to play to our strengths. So then what we ended up doing was collaboratively writing each chapter, taking on a different role. So Mark would take on the role of deep researcher, which of course he used the help of AI to do. It would be funny to write a book about AI and not use AI. So actually through the process, we learned a lot. One of the things that we ended up doing, which was a new way for us to use Copilot, was to carry out the research, and then we would come together, he and I, and record in teams and talk through the ideas, talk through the research, add in personal stories, make notes about or suggestions about where we might expand out the idea or the concept, what particular prompt or tip we might want to include. And then we use the transcript from those calls as a way that was a much richer starting point than it was using our language. And so when we would query that or prompt with AI on top of that transcript, it was grounded in things that sounded like us. So that's a technique we now use in a lot of our work.
That is fantastic guidance and a wonderful use case for how to leverage AI beside you and as an enabler. I feel like a lot of people, going back to your conversation about, AI anxiety to curiosity, they really don't see themselves as having AI as enabling their skills.
I think it requires busting these myths that we see and hear around us, right? That people that use AI are cheating, that AI is going to take our jobs and steal our creativity, or that AI is going to mean that we don't need our knowledge or our experience anymore because it will become irrelevant. And I think that's at the heart of it, the fear of becoming irrelevant. Whereas in practice, and that's why I keep coming back to this word practice, because it reminds me that we're learning every day, because the information that we have is new every day and the tools that we're working with are changing every day. So if we're practicing, then we go back to some of those myths and start to dispel them by going, actually, I should learn as much as I can, because when I add what I learn and what I know with AI, I can go so much further. Or that we can see that we will create new things and new roles and new ways of adding value in our organization. That's a different mindset. So we talk a little bit about mindset in the book as well, both from the point of view of an individual and the leadership you personally need to bring into changing your mindset, but also as a manager and also as someone maybe evaluating the performance of someone who is using AI in their work and shifting the culture intentionally from one that might make them want to hide that use or be ashamed of that use to showing that it's actually celebrated.
You're really highlighting something there. Again, very important. That seems to be a habit of yours, highlighting important things. I love that. It's great. It's great. Well, you're talking about culture. And what do you see as some of the most important things that a leader can do when thinking about this type of adoption to improve the culture of learning around them?
I think they can demonstrate it. That's a big first one, and they can learn in public, which is really it takes putting your ego aside and being able to say, I'm learning too. This is something that I did that now I've learned from. So that's a big one, sort of being vulnerable, because then people will also feel that they can share their learnings and not be sort of punished or judged for them. So that's one. The other one that we talk a lot about is how leaders can foster a culture of innovation. And the innovation culture and learning how to think, some of this design thinking type techniques or creative thinking, entrepreneurial thinking, they haven't always been encouraged or rewarded in our corporate systems and our enterprise systems. One of the things we think about is redeployment. So we see at the moment some of the trends in companies who are adopting AI, and sometimes they point to AI as a reason for layoffs, and sometimes they don't, and that's a media commentary. So we don't always know, right? But one of the things we know is that we're going to be asking humans to play different roles in the future than they have in the past. And I think it's a massive risk for organizations to see that a change is happening and let go of people who hold really great experience. They hold great knowledge about your organization, and they probably have positive regard for you, who you are and what you're about, right? If you lay them off, you lose that knowledge and you lose that good faith. Whereas if we know and are ready for this need for innovation and redeployment, we can think about a completely new structure that says, hey, we're going to have a team of people who are maybe in that Copilot champion family, or people who are curious and people who are really leaned in. We're going to give them special projects that talk about that resource redeployment. And we know that a CFO would love to take the budget away and probably not offer it again, right? So if you lose that headcount and you lose that cost center in a way, if it's thought of as a cost center, it's really hard to make a business case to get that back. Whereas if you can say, hey, we've got this little incubator of ideas, almost bringing a little bit of startup culture into our bigger enterprises, then I think that's where we'll really start to see the value of people plus AI.
You said some really important things there that I think I heard. The preservation of institutional knowledge was one of them. I've been a big fan of that for a long time. One of the reasons why I've always wanted, better collaboration architecture and knowledge inside of SharePoint or other places is really gathering and preserving that institutional knowledge. But so much of it, as you point out, is in people. People are, a well-empowered workforce is your competitive differentiation. And then you also talked about language, and I find that fascinating. So often I find that the folks who have done well being an adoption specialist, or now maybe they are in charge of user experience at a larger organization, directors of collaboration, they have a different way of communicating about these things than maybe someone with a little bit less experience. Do you see that way of communicating, bringing that startup culture, kind of language into what is happening to be essential?
Yeah, the communications role is one of or the skill is one that we highlight in some of the essential skills that we need to be really effective collaborators with AI. And we talk about it not just in the sense of how you communicate back and forth with AI, but also how you communicate amongst your teams, amongst your reports. And yeah, I completely agree. It's super important.
Absolutely. So I love that. You have a type of insight that is both very strategic but also empathetic. I wonder where you learned that. I wonder if you had life experiences that have helped you get that kind of personal insight.
One of the things that I wanted to include in the book was a grounding principle I learned at school, and I've had on the bottom of my resume ever since I've been a professional. And it's a Māori proverb. So Māori are the Indigenous people of New Zealand. You can see some of the tohu, the art behind me that represents my culture. And one of the things, the phrases that we include in the book in the last chapter on culture, is a proverb that says, he aha te mea nui o te ao, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata, which means if you were to ask me what is the most important thing in the world, it is people, it is people, it is people. And that has become something that I hold in my mind a lot. And Mark and I both share that when we think about technology, we have to remember that it is to serve people. And I think that empathy comes from that centering of people. And if we can continue to center people's experiences, then we can see technology be used for good.
You just touched my heart with that, because I've talked so long about the people first strategy and human centric engagement, and human centric strategies for technology. And sometimes I wonder if I'm screaming into the void, because, there's a lot of people who are enamored by the technology itself. I'm less enamored by the technology than the people and what they do with it. And I have a lot of hope for people. And that's why I believe that this technology can be used for good, even though there are risks that we have to mitigate. So I love hearing that, and the way that you've woven that through your journey is spectacular. Speaking of journeys, I believe that you took another one, and this isn't your first book, is it?
No, it's not my first book. I think that's what gave me the confidence to pitch Microsoft Press out of the blue that we should write this book. When I was, I was 27 and I had the nerve to write a memoir, which is, a little bit funny. But what happened was my husband, Mark, and I had this really, tough year. We lost 4 really close people in our family in the space of a year. One of those people was my dad, who I was really close to. And we kind of did the throw yourself into work thing for a bit, and then decided to try a different approach when that wasn't really working. And so I pitched Mark that we should quit our jobs in Sydney and go traveling it ended up being nearly 18 months, which was wonderful. It was fabulous.
That sounds wonderful. I bet, what a way that sounds like the cornerstone of you being able to transform one emotional state into another, which is, by the way, a very advanced skill. Most people, if they feel grief or rage or frustration or even happiness, that's where that emotion stays. But what you're talking about is taking one and transmuting it into something else. Very alchemical, by the way, and very spiritual, but also, a highly evolved way of dealing with your emotions, which I feel like I see reflected in the text of the book and in your approach. Am I sort of on there?
I think you're spot on. And it was both the trip, which was bucket list, and I suppose a carpe diem reaction to the realization that our time is not guaranteed here on this earth. And also it was realizing that I needed to write. So I wrote the book about my experience or the catalyst of grief sending us off on this journey that ended up being, in lots of ways, a trip of a lifetime, and also a realization that you take yourself with you, right? And so the grief was with me on that journey too. Unfortunately, I didn't leave it behind in Sydney. what I promised myself at the end of that year was to fulfill a dream I'd written on my bucket list when I was 18 to write a book. And I just committed to myself that I would write 1,000 words every day. They didn't have to be good words, but I would write 1,000 words a day until my book was finished. And I've had so many people tell me that even though it was very much my personal journey, that they found themselves able to explore their experience of grief through reading the story. So I sometimes I forget that I wrote that book because I think I wrote it in such a particular state of mind.
Yeah.
And I wrote it imagining no one would ever read it. So there's a lot of personal things in there. So sometimes I forget that I wrote that book, but I'm actually really proud of it too, whenever I remember that I wrote it.
I can relate to that. I have done a lot of processing through writing in my lifetime as well. And it's very interesting now to go back and read things that I wrote in my 20s or my 30s or what have you, and see the different perspective I bring to all of that now. A lot of it is emotional processing. Some of it is out there in the world. Some of it isn't. If you haven't put your name through Copilot or ChatGPT, I highly suggest that you do. It's a good way of seeing all the things that it can find about you. And I didn't realize that if you did that in Copilot and inside Microsoft, you would find all of my stuff. But I'm fine with that actually, because it does represent a moment in time. But you're talking about this transformation, transmutation of one emotion to another, of being really committed to curiosity, and also this idea that things are practice, which I love this. We need a t-shirt, life is practice. I think that should be your knit with some of your beautiful artwork on it. Like, we're just going to design that together, I think, and we'll make that.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I think we'll make that a thing, because I want that t-shirt. And so we'll just make that happen.
Okay, great.
But learning how to do those things can be its own process. How do you help other people do this, make this transformation from AI anxiety, as I referred to it, into curiosity, or to go through this process of becoming essentially their own leader in what's going on in tech right now?
We do workshops, and every workshop I start with sharing a concept from Te Ao Māori, from the Māori worldview, which is the concept of ako, AKO. Ako is both the word for learning and teaching. So it's my favorite word from our language. And I share that because it's important that people know that what they hold in their knowledge and their experience is valuable, and that people can learn from them just as they're learning from others. And that's probably the theme that runs through all of my work. And Mark and I have a program called the 90-Day Mentoring Challenge, which has helped people working in the Microsoft ecosystem, particularly in biz apps, carve a career path. It's not a technical program. It's a program that really encourages people to develop the skills that will transfer to whatever role they have. And that's at the heart of that too. It's recognizing that when I did StrengthsFinder, Maximizer was one of my strengths, which means that I can see the good in other people that they can't necessarily see in themselves. So I do move through the world with this belief that every person has inherent value, but the world kind of gives you a lot of messages that say that you don't, or that you should fit in a box. So yeah, the practice, the little bits of belief that can stack over time can lead you places that a version of yourself would have thought was impossible.
And giving yourself permission to live outside of the box. Just for myself, that has been one of the things that I've struggled with in comparing myself to other Microsoft leaders, or other product leaders, or what have you. But they're not me and I'm not them. And, having that, what you're talking about is building those skills that are transferable, but also just giving yourself permission to value who you are and what you bring to the table. I think the world in general needs a little more of that. Can you do a 90-day mentoring challenge for the planet? Is that possible? Can we just engage you?
That sounds great. Yeah, well, let's just do that. It's funny you say that though, because I totally relate. Like, I spent a long amount of my career working inside a similar corporate system, right, that levels you and compares you to promote you. And, I learned so many great skills at Google. I met incredible people. And I got to the point where it wasn't the system that I could work best inside of anymore. And coming out of that system and did require, like you say, a genuine evaluation of what was important to me. And if I was evaluating my own life and my own outputs, what would get on the list? What would make me feel like a success? What would make me feel wealthy, even redefining wealth for myself?
You're speaking about, a really important truth when it comes to your own personal career management, which is a topic I'm very passionate about, and helping other people understand their worth, but also own their own narrative around what success means to them. I think you're talking about having an individual perspective of wealth and success and value. And I'm not sure that the world really encourages that, right? Because that's really leaning into people being individuals and differentiation. And there's value in having a structure. I appreciate the structure of Microsoft, but I appreciate it also because I've been able to bend it to accommodate me, not the other way around.
And it's a time and a season, right? Like there were so many times when that structure did more for me than I could have ever done, without it.
Right.
And it comes back to people for me, because I met so many people, maybe while I stayed in that structure longer than perhaps, like maybe I had some writing on the wall, right, for myself, that I was like, hey, maybe I don't want to keep climbing this ladder. Maybe what I want is somewhere else. But it wasn't the time for me. I didn't have the skills. I didn't have the capability. I didn't have the resources to make that big call in a way that felt safe to me. So I speak about it with big respect, and I would never say to someone that there is a clear answer, but I always encourage people to define success for themselves, because then even if you stay in the exact same job in the exact same system, you're in there with a different mindset.
Yes, you are. That is completely true. And the other piece of that I think that you're alluding to as well is, there's many, many different subcultures inside of a large organization like that. And so making sure that you're in a place that fits for you and brings you joy and energy and brings meaning into your life can be very valuable, and keep going until you find that. I usually say that there's, working at Microsoft, it's a multifaceted diamond, and you can find as many subcultures and disciplines and areas to work in as there are differences in the globe, right? The same would be true at Google. And that has always worked for me. And you're right. I have been able to reach and help more people because of the ecosystem around me than I ever, probably would have on my own. But I've also found my bubble, my bubble of people that I feel really good and I feel seen and validated by, so that, the efforts that I put out there are reciprocated. And so, you put so much effort, you and Mark both, into this book. I'm so excited. Tell us some of the details. When's it coming out? Where do we get it? We want to make sure that, everybody gets a copy in their hot little hand. How do people do that?
So it's available on Microsoft Press Store. And the really important thing to us was that we worked with Microsoft Press to make it available, not just as a print book and not just as an ebook, but as an audiobook as well, because we know that a lot of people, Mark is one of them, who needs to read an audiobook. And he often shares a hack that he will listen and read at the same time to maintain focus and to kind of get through what can sometimes be a challenging thing for him. And a lot of people in our community, they also say the same thing. They're like, I can't just sit down and read a book anymore. I need the audiobook. So that's definitely something that's been a priority to us. You can get it on Microsoft Press Store. It's also available on Amazon. And if you buy it on Amazon and you want to leave us a review, that would be amazing, because that really helps with the way it can be discovered. This book, we often get asked, is it going to go out of date tomorrow because Copilot's changing all the time? It's a guide for business leaders and consultants, and we've made it, principles based rather than technical. So it will, we hope, endure and be relevant through the adoption phase.
That's fantastic, because these types of principles are evergreen. The technology is changing daily, but showing up, driving culture, driving curiosity, understanding how to truly leverage the institutional knowledge and talent of your workforce in service of something greater than we could all do individually. These things are timeless, and I'm thrilled to have your contributions into this space. There's so much good work to talk about and so many different angles to approach this work from. that I certainly welcome all of this. Of course, you know that this is, near and dear to my heart, this entire conversation, but primarily because of what you talked about earlier, which was, really understanding what brings joy and meaning to my life. I've had those moments where, you understand that that time can be limited here, and what are we really doing with it? And so, I'm just really thrilled that part of what I get to do with my time is talk to you. This is great.
This has been such a fun conversation. I feel like we're just old mates having a chat.
Absolutely, we are. And I want to pursue this t-shirt idea because, I really like that. I think we should pick a charity and donate the proceeds or something fun like that.
We absolutely should.
As you're putting the book together, doing research and finding resources, was there anything helpful that maybe Microsoft put together that helped you along the way? Maybe?
No, there was the resource adoption.microsoft.com/copilot. I feel like more people need to know about this. We shout about it in the book often as hey, go and look at this. There are guides on setting up your AI council. There are guides on communications for your teams. There's examples to bring it to life. It's such an incredible resource. And, no jokes aside, it has been so helpful in our own work and understanding. And I was actually doing some training for some internal teams at Microsoft and realized hey guys, are you using this in your conversations? Because it's so rich. It's so valuable.
Thank you so much. My team and all the people who contribute resources there have worked so hard on the Copilot content. We've really had to re-envision everything because of the clock speed of AI, because of all the things that you talked about needing to change culture and bringing people along and tailoring things for roles. And this, I believe, is actually the first time that true user enablement has actually been included lockstep along with every piece of technical readiness. And so there's an equality now between these two always equal work streams that is now reflected in the implementation guides, the business leader guides. And, I'm really proud. I'm really proud of the work there. And especially big shout out to Jesse Huang on my team, who is the content curator and the chief editor of that entire site. But thank you. Thank you for seeing it and acknowledging it and using it. We appreciate you for doing that and even telling people inside Microsoft about it because that's half the battle sometimes, right?
But you nailed it. This is different in that you need to be thinking about adoption in the internal case before you've even sold the deal, or for Microsoft partners too, right? Before you've even signed the contract, you should be talking about your adoption plan because you won't get buy-in and value and renewal if that plan hasn't happened at the same time. I love how practical it is, and it probably inspired us. At the end of every chapter in our book, we include a try this prompt, just an example prompt just to kind of reflect back on the chapter and to encourage people to practice as they read.
That is such fantastic practice to build into and as a daily habit. We really find that people who take this approach to having AI become a daily part of their life fare better as the technology continues to evolve and change. And of course, I couldn't agree with you more. There's a marked difference that we found in our data between organizations who really understand what human workforce transformation looks like and enablement looks like and put it into practice versus those who are trying to do more, I want to call them old school, but I'll call them classic ROI or return on investment definitions around AI enablement. And so people can get stuck after the hype moment is gone. After that initial kind of whiz bang where all adoption programs go well, by the time you get to 200 level, they start to fizzle out unless you've built this engine, right, of communication. And I loved how you talked about that also in the book, keeping that communication going. This has been a wonderful conversation. I appreciate you so much. And everyone, make sure that you get your copy of Microsoft 365 Copilot Adoption, a practical guide for business leaders and consultants. And you don't want to miss using a special listener discount. Thank you, Megan and Mark, for sharing that with us. You'll get to save 35% on the book. Go out and get your copy now, or get two, or get 3 or 5. Share them with other people. We all need to understand how to approach life with a little more learning and a little more teaching and a little more meaning. And I have a feeling reading this book from Meg and Mark will help us along that journey. So thank you so much for watching. We'll see you again soon.